Hello everybody, this is lecture number 3 in the story of where we come from, and that story must be a story of spontaneous self-assembly from hydrogen and nothing else. So the first lecture we looked at the standard model, which is how matter can simply exist, and from that we looked at how those forces and atoms make stars which spontaneously assemble elements, only using the forces and atoms which are inside the standard model. When that star explodes and releases those elements, it can make a new solar system just using gravity and nothing else. And that solar system has stability and order, equilibrium. I need equilibrium to have it around for a long time, long enough for life to evolve. It also produces things which are the right size. I can't have the Earth with too much gravity, or nothing would move around on the surface. And that allows chemistry to take place. And it must be in the right position. It doesn't mean that you can't have living things away from an energy source like the sun, but it does mean you can't have living things that use photosynthesis, and that is a very special story, as you'll see later. Now, if that's true, and if life itself did spontaneously start by itself, that means everything in the natural world has self-assembled to allow that to happen. There will be a lot of evidence all around me. And it also means that everything you can think of in the natural world is a symptom of that self-assembly. And symptoms can never lie. They can only be misinterpreted. So what I want to do today is to continue our story of self-assembly. But this is the story of life. So, here's the Earth, which assembled itself by gravity. It's got the right chemistry. It's in the right position. That chemistry needs to include heavier elements like iron. If it doesn't include that, it doesn't mean I can't have life, but I can't have life that's like this. Here. Now this is where life starts on the Earth. Now I've drawn a timeline, and this is what's not shown in books because it's really difficult. If I look at the timeline here of life, evolution on the Earth, people imagine that it would be full of dinosaurs and all that sort of stuff, but just look where the dinosaurs are on the Earth. Right over here. That's where they are. So all this time on the Earth, this is when evolution is really taking place. And for that amount of time, simply not to have too much change, I need the stability which the solar system has given me just using gravity and the Higgs field and nothing else. Now, this is the story of spontaneous self-assembly. So how on earth am I going to get life here making itself? Well, first, I really need to decide what life actually is. It's very difficult. Well, it's not an atom. An atom is just, or we call it, things. And when we look back to the first lecture, we'll see they're not actually things at all, but they have consequences. Consequences which I can see. Now, if I look at this, it seems to have properties which are inherent of the little atoms that make it. Well, that's not true. It's not the little protons and electrons which give these properties, it's how they're held together. Each proton is the same, but all the elements look and feel different. There isn't something, and a proton and an electron, which have a property of hardness. So that's not telling me the story, it's how they're held together. Now, because we've got to use forces from the standard model, we need a force to make the life by itself. That can't be gravity. Gravity is 10 to the 40 times smaller than electromagnetism. It can only make big things like Earths and moons. It can only work as a collective in untold numbers of atoms. So that's going to be no use. Life is small. Now there's only two visible forces, life and electromagnetism. So it's got to be electromagnetism which is going to assemble life. Now, if we come over here, let's just remind ourselves of the electromagnetic force. If I look at anything here, it's all made by electromagnetism, plus and minus. But that cancels itself out. If it didn't cancel itself out, it would be far too strong. But if I get a small amount of imbalance in the plus and minus, then that makes things change. It makes things happen. It makes things move. It makes things self-assemble. Now, we're going to have a look at this, and I can see up here the force which is both attracting and repelling at the same time. And that's extremely important, because if it didn't repel, if there was no repulsive force, then the Earth wouldn't look like this. It would look like this. There's nothing to hold the whole Earth up. Now, this machine here is all made of plus and minus. It's holding it together and keeping it apart. If I put a little bit of imbalance, then things start to move and change. So let's just switch it on. And the amount of imbalance which we're going to use here is tiny, but you'll see you now get things happening. And you can see it attracts and repels at the same time, and I'm going to use that and that little bit of imbalance to make molecules. Now, I've got a little model here which demonstrates that if everything was held together just by gravity, it just falls together. But if it attracts and repels at the same time, it goes together, but leaves lots of space, empty space. And that's what I need for the Earth to stay up. It attracts and repels at the same time, or everything will just collapse and disappear. I'd like to say thanks to James for giving me this. It's been very useful. Now, because if I put some imbalance into anything, it's going to make it try and balance again. I'm going to get equilibrium. That's how the solar system ordered itself. The same thing is going to happen at molecular level. Just to show you how that's going to work. This is just a very crude demonstration. Now, if I try and put these where I want them, it won't do that. It'll find an equilibrium, maybe something like that. Now, the molecule of water looks very much like that. There's an angle between them which is always exactly the same. I can't put these where I want them, but it does show how molecules work. There's other places of equilibrium, maybe like that. And CO2 is much more like this one. Now, this is a very simple demonstration, and electromagnetism is much, much more complex than that. When I get down to quantum level, the differences are very tiny and very precise. Remember, the word quantum means an amount, very precise amounts. And that's really what life is. Quantum machinery. Life takes place at the quantum level. Let me show you what I mean. Now, you all know what photosynthesis is, but we seem to be programmed to miss the obvious. It's really a quantum machine. Now, we know that it uses chlorophyll, but look at this. One molecule of chlorophyll accepts one photon, one quantum packet of energy, exactly the right amount of energy. I can use blue light and red light. I can't use green light. It's the wrong amount of energy. That's why the plants throw the green light back out, and that's why they're all the same colour. And that displaces one electron. I can't have a machine any more precise than that. It really is a piece of quantum machinery that self-assembles. Now, to see how life actually works, I need to come over here and have a look at this toy which shows you what's happening. Now, just killed everybody on the earth, so just put that somewhere safe. Yes, and here. Imagine molecules like this. There's a gradient down here, and I can have a gradient if I just put two molecules beside each other with a slight bit of imbalance. This one wants to take this atom here and let it roll down. If I have an electron gradient that's going to pass one electron, just as in photosynthesis, down here, it makes everything work by itself. Now, I do need something to lift this up the gradient. I need a battery. That's the energy which life needs. Now, photosynthesis is using sunshine. We use sugar. I don't need to use those, but life tends to be very slow if I don't. I must have an energy source for life to exist, to lift my electron up here, and if I just do that and put it in, everything else happens by itself. And because the structure remains the same, if I lift it up and do it again, it's just a repetitive process. Now, I need to assemble things like this and always do them the same. We'll see why later. But let's have a look at what we need for life to spontaneously exist. So, let's go back to the beginning here. Now, if it's going to be spontaneous, there has to be some way of moving, allowing things to move. If I just put magnets on here, they can't move. Well, I need everything in life. I need everything to be able to move. So I need to dissolve life down to quantum sizes. So it must be in this. Now, in every school, there's always books that tell you why you need to drink water, but it never tells you why. And it's to put anything I want to put in here, sugar or salt or starch, it dissolves it down to a quantum level. Now I've got the right size bits to make the machines work. There are no exceptions. Life must have water, and it must be like this. If it's ice, then the molecules can't move. And that means the Earth needs to be in the right position, not too close to the sun, or this would all evaporate into water vapor, not too far from the sun, or it changes into ice. Well, that's no good. I also need a very high concentration of molecules in there. I've got to keep the molecules together in the water. So I need a concentrating mechanism for life to start here. Something that's going to put lots of those molecules together. Well, that mechanism, you could imagine, could be something like tide pools. The ocean washes in over the land every day and then is pulled out by the moon and leaves water sitting full of molecules all over the land. Well, as that water evaporates, it's going to concentrate the molecules and put them together every day. And that concentration will get higher and higher. Now, a long time ago, the moon was much closer to the Earth, so the tides were much bigger. So I've got a mechanism which is going to allow me to produce very highly concentrated amounts of water for life to begin. Now, when life starts, I've got to keep it together in that concentration. So I need to put the water in something like that, a cell. Now, life comes in cells, because if it's not, I lose that concentration, I lose the machinery. A cell, it doesn't sound very complicated, but there will be millions and millions of machines like this, all at quantum level inside just one cell. And I've got to have some way of using the machines again and again. If I've got something that always works, something like photosynthesis, I've got to build exactly the same machines. So I need something which is going to have a memory of how to make the same machine again, and then I can use it time and time again in every cell. If we look at some of these cycles of machines like this, they're used in all air-breathing organisms. Something like the citric acid cycle. Everyone uses it, and that's going to tell us a story about evolution. Now, if this is true, that life is self-assembled, there are going to be patterns which are going to tell me a story of ever-increasing complexity. Now, when I look around, it's very easy to miss the story, not to understand it. So I'm going to look for things which all living things have, and this is one of them. Carbon. So I need water, high concentrations of water, and I need carbon. Every living thing. Why carbon? This is a self-assembly process. There must be something very special about this, and there is. If I go down to the quantum level, each carbon atom has 4 electrons which are not balanced. And that means if we want to balance it, I've got to balance those 4 electrons. It's the only atom which is like that. That means it can share those electrons with other atoms and balance the electromagnetic force. And that means it makes more compounds than any other atom. It can make more different things, complex things, better and complex living things. It's the only atom that can do it. So I can really say, if there's life out there in the solar system and the universe, and there will be, it's going to need water. There's no exceptions. It's going to need carbon. There's no exceptions. And it's got to have somewhere which has an energy source, a battery, that could be heat from inside a moon or a planet. It could be sunshine. We're very lucky that we're close to the sun, because if you don't have photosynthesis, life doesn't get big and fast. Now, let's see if we can tell a story. Life starts here, but there's no photosynthesis till here. Now, life back here, we call these bacteria, but we don't, because they're so different from the bacteria that we have over here, we've now separated them and given them a different name. They're called archaea. And they really are very different from the bacteria that live on you and me. We have a symbiotic relationship with our bacteria, and sometimes they make us sick. But there are no archaea that make us sick, so we don't have that relationship with us. Life here just simply needs one machine and the battery to self-assemble. But then there's a problem. If I want life to continue, I've got to self-assemble that machine again. And that process is done by DNA. Now, you all know and heard of DNA, but how does it work? How can it possibly be a memory? Well, this is a very crude demonstration of how the DNA molecules work. If I've got something like this, remember magnets and electromagnetism, reflections of the same thing. It makes things stick together. But molecules stick together very exactly. Magnets are a very crude form of that. Now imagine I've got magnets north and south, north and south. Every north will always attract a south. I could have a pattern of norths and souths down here. Now, if I unzip that molecule, I've now got something which is sticky. And I've now got two patterns. If I dip that into a bowl full of magnets, I'm going to replicate those two patterns exactly. You can see how it works. This is a very crude example, but I would then lift it out and I would have replicated exactly my patterns. Now, molecules are much more accurate than the magnets, but that's the principle of how it's done. Atoms fit together precisely. Remember, in the quantum world, everything must be exact. Now that means if I've got an atom, something like this, sodium, it's got one electron which is by itself out here, it's unbalanced. If that meets another atom, chlorine, which has exactly the right amount of unbalanced positive charge, then those two, when they meet, will fit together perfectly. They will always clamp together, produce something which is in equilibrium, very stable. Now, sodium is a very, very dangerous metal. If you try and put it in water, it reacts very much with the water because of this. And chlorine, well, that's a very dangerous gas. If you breathe it, it will kill you. If you put these two together, you can eat it. It's salt. Now that's a very simple example of how the quantum world is going to join things together at the electromagnetic level. We need a lot more complexity than that. So let's see if we can put some complexity into life. Once I've got a mechanism which allows me to repeat and do the same thing again, make these machines, I've got an energy source, I've got water, then life is going to happen spontaneously. Now, life doesn't happen by chance. There's an awful lot of nonsense spoken about evolution from people who don't understand it and say, oh, life, evolution has something to do with chance. You can see, if you put the right ingredients together, they stick together. The chance isn't that it will happen. That's just when it happens. It could be here or here. It doesn't matter. It's always going to happen if I give it the right circumstances and ingredients. So let's get all that nonsense out of our heads, which are other stories. This is a jigsaw with millions and millions of pieces that all fit together. Now, intuitively, you know, if you come across a jigsaw and see there's some pieces missing, it doesn't mean the jigsaw is invalid. It means you need to look for the pieces. The fact that the pieces fit together means it's not chance, because pieces of a jigsaw don't fit together by chance, and that's what makes it valid. This jigsaw has millions of pieces. If somebody shows you another jigsaw with no pieces, well, that doesn't really work. Now, there's going to be lots of evidence of how this complexity increases, and the evidence which I'm going to use is sugar. Now, that's because when photosynthesis starts here, right, remember there's no flowers or dinosaurs in here, right back here. The Earth is a very, very different place. There's no oxygen in the air. Now, that means that the sky wouldn't be blue, it would be red, and right back here, the Earth is going to be a completely different place from now. But life can exist like that. Life is able to exist in a lot more places than we ever imagined when I was a boy. If we look in scalding hot pools of acid, we find living things. But it's really here that life starts to get going. Now, let's see what photosynthesis really is. I'm going to use some water, 6 H2O, 6 molecules of water. And if I add them to 6 molecules of CO2, this is where I put the photon in. This is my battery. I use that photon change the water and the air into sugar. Now I can only do that at quantum level. People can't change air and water into sugar because we can't work at quantum level. Not yet, anyway. C6H12O6. Now all the numbers must add up. I've got to have the same number of quantum bits here as I have here. Well, if I look here, I've got 6 O2s, which the plant doesn't want. So it starts to throw out oxygen as a waste product. Now, because photosynthesis started right back here, there's a long, long time here to start changing the atmosphere. Well, if I look back at the amount of time, if I go back to the dinosaurs, that seems a long time ago, but life really does need deep time to evolve. This is the story of evolution, not the dinosaurs. That's much easier. Now, we call things like plants autotrophs because they are making sugar. They don't need any food. Now, the first living thing must have been an autotroph because there was no food on the planet, absolutely none, no sugar. But because plants are now making sugar, there is food. But if you want to come along and eat it, you need oxygen. Well, it just so happens the plant is also making oxygen as a waste product. Well, let's have a look at this next part of the story because it's really like a mirror. Heterotrophs, things which need to eat. Just to make it simple, we're going to call these the sugar makers. Now these are sugar takers. Everybody can understand that. You're either this or this. Let's have a look at the quantum mechanics of the sugar takers. I need my sugar, C6H12O6, and I need some oxygen. Now that gives me out energy. Here I put in energy. Here I get energy back out. That's the energy for things like you and me. And I also make 6 molecules of water and 6 CO2. So you can see it's like a mirror. And I think it's very important that you show children that when you're teaching them, because it has to be in this order. I can't have these living things first. It's got to be these living things first. And these living things are making oxygen. Now when you get living things like this, life can speed up a lot. This energy-rich compound here being burned by oxygen means that I don't just have to have small things like bacteria. I can then make cells which are much bigger, and we call these eukaryotes. And what we're going to see is that the evolution of bacterial cells, archaea, into eukaryotes over here is really the story of where life starts to change and speed up. Now, the amount of change is really important. I can't change my machine too much or it won't work. I can add to the machine and I can put more parts on it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it won't work. But I can put machines together. Now, this machine at the top is glycolysis. It starts with glucose, the molecule over here, and it changes it into pyruvate and drops that into this machine here, the citric acid cycle, and all air-breathing organisms use this, and they use this, it makes water, CO2, and I get energy. The DNA means I can make the machine again, because DNA sometimes changes. If I make a successful change, I've added to my machine without breaking it. If I make an unsuccessful machine change, nothing happens. If it changes like that, when it comes over here, you can see the machine is now broken. Or if this doesn't lead into the other machine, then it doesn't work. So you can't have too much change. I've got to have change in just the right amount. So let's see if we can define evolution. Making the same thing again with the right amount of change. Not too much. If you get too much change, it's not going to work. This allows the complexity gradient to continue. So going right back to the first and second lectures, we've got matter assembling into solar systems which are complex and stable, and that allows molecular changes to take place on planets and moons, and I can increase my complexity gradient by having machines, quantum machines, things which we call living things. Now there's another part of the story. Once I've got living things which are like that, I'm going to get molecules, and I mean just molecules, which are going to fit themselves together, but they're not going to be a cell in water. They're going to be something like this, a virus. Spontaneously assemble within cells. A virus has nucleic acid, DNA. It's using the same thing to make the same molecule again, but there's no chemistry. And it doesn't have the machines to use that DNA, to unzip the DNA and make it work again. So the trick is, the virus is going to use any living thing, any cell. It's going to use that machinery, sometimes your machinery. And viruses do evolve. The mathematics of the evolutionary process is just the same as other living things, but it's just molecules. Well, some viruses are small. This is the smallest kind, a viroid. It only has 246 nucleotide bases, and that means if I could see its DNA like this, I could count 246 of these. Well, that really isn't very big at all. We need 3 or 4 billion. Well, a virus, 240, it really is just a molecule. It does not code for proteins. It really needs other living things, and that tells you a story. A virus can't have been here before there were living things. It must have started over here. And that means it's self-assembled. If it's happened once, it's going to happen twice. It just needs to give it the right conditions. It means there can be viruses self-assembling out there now, but you can't be in the right place at the right time ever to see that process happen. Now, just to really throw the cat amongst the pigeons, as we say, look at this, a prion. Now this is an infectious agent with no nucleic acid, no DNA, no RNA. It propagates, makes more copies of itself by making more misfolded protein. It's a misshaped protein that when it gets into your cells just makes your proteins misshape. And these are untreatable diseases. There's nothing you can do, and they are always fatal. They always kill the organism. So now you can see how molecular evolution here is at work. It's not what we thought. So it really does change our definition of life when I look at this. Something here which just, if it gets into a cell, just copies itself until it's destroyed everything. Well, that really does change my mind about what life is. this is all part of this. It's using the life, the much better complexity here, just to let molecules do their own thing. Now, here's my life up here. This is where I start to get the first animals. And here, you can see evolution really does speed up. Something's happening here. Here, I've just got cells. But in this long, long period of time, cells are evolving to make all the different molecular machines that we need to have the diversity of life which we see on the planet today. They have to be ready. A liver cell can't evolve into a liver cell. It's got to be able to already do all those things. Now, what I want to show you is how good cells are at living by themselves. If you think of something like an amoeba, there it is. It can move, find food. It has senses, and very strangely, it has much more DNA than you and me. Now, it's a real mistake to think that we are the most highly evolved living thing. As we've seen back here, DNA just wants to make more DNA. And if it does that by increasing diversity, then it's more highly evolved. And because bacteria have been on the earth for all this period of time, they can do things like use cyanide for food. They have an incredible diversity. Most of it we haven't even yet discovered. But it means they can live anywhere. We can't do that. We can't even drink dirty water anymore. Now, if I go back to my cells, this is where evolution is really taking place, but it's all at a microscopic level. So I do spend a lot of time looking down microscopes for patterns in the microscope which give away how this evolution is taking place. Now, I found this cell here. Now, this is a very, very strange cell. This is a single cell. It hunts for food. It has a weapon, and that weapon is like a long elephant's trunk which you can put out, and it must have senses to use that weapon. It moves around very, very quickly, very efficiently. It has things like water regulation. So it goes to the bathroom. If it didn't, it would explode. The water would keep trying to go into its body and reduce that concentration which we need for life to take place. So it's no surprise that all the life here is taking place in water. It's much easier if you're in water. If you go out of the water, you've got to take the water with you, and that creates a lot of problems. But this cell also has sexual reproduction. So that's a single cell which has already evolved to this, which increases my change. And it's a very, very good way of mixing DNA, but mixing the DNA together with other DNA, which I know is going to fit together, but allowing change to take place. And that means that the evolution will speed up. Now, plants don't evolve sexual reproduction until here, but they've been on the earth a long time. This is where they start, and they must have evolved it separately. So you can see that evolution happens time and time and time again. If that's the mechanism that works, that's the mechanism that it's going to continue using. And that's the same for my molecular machines. I see this machine here, the citric acid cycle, which is used by all air-breathing organisms, as something like the derailleur system on a bicycle. That's the way it's done. And all bicycles on the earth use the same thing. And I've got to keep repeating that. But then you can see how evolution can speed up. When I've got enough of these machines over here, and I can start to put them together, then really things can change. Now that's going to be what we'll talk about in the next lecture. Really the evolution that happens here. And it's very, very different from the evolution which is happening in this large amount of time. Now, I hope today I've changed your mind about living things. When we get on to people, that's going to be a very different story, but there will be the same patterns which are going to go through the whole of it. And I just want to go back to sugar very quickly, because this is how I teach evolution to children. There's going to be a complexity gradient. Now, here's glucose, C6H12O6. If I slightly rearrange the bonding of that molecule, I can get a different sugar, fructose, fruit sugar. It's a monosaccharide, simple, one. And there's one more, galactose. So just by changing how those molecules join to each other, I've got now 3 different sugars. Now it's no surprise that that glucose is going to show up right through life and leave symptoms and evidence. Now, if I start to put these sugars together, I get disaccharides, 2 sugars together. If I buy this one, sucrose, this is what we put in your tea. You buy it in the shop. This one here, maltose. Now, because we live in Taiwan, people really like this. You can buy it in biscuits. What's this one called, Gracie, in Chinese maltose? Let's just have a look. Thank you very much. Much beloved in Taiwan. And the sugar which is in milk, lactose. You must have a battery in milk, because babies only drink milk. If there isn't a battery, an energy source, then they stop working. And now you can see I can increase my complexity, because I can now add these bits together and make more complex sugars like this, honey. And I can just keep now increasing complexity until I get up to very big sugars like this. Starch. Now this is inside all things like potatoes and seeds like rice. It's a very, very good energy source, and it packs a lot of energy into a very small space, so I can store that energy until later. But then, if I want to make bigger and bigger things, I've got to make them, and it's no surprise that things like this, the leaf, is made of sugar. A very, very long chain molecule called cellulose. The name tells you it's made of sugar, but it's just keeping adding them together. And cellulose is just made by adding lots of molecules of glucose together. And this sugar, it's also very interesting to notice the colour. You'll see why later. This sugar, the sugar that insects, lobsters and crabs make themselves from, chitin. Now that's very, very similar to cellulose. And it's no surprise, it's based on glucose. But have a look at this. This molecule here, now I think we're going to have to come in very close. This is a hexokinase molecule. Just look at that complexity. But it's no surprise, that molecule is based on glucose. So you do find this evidence of increasing complexity right the way through life. Now, just before we finish, I want to show you these sugars. And we've been looking at this colour. Now, if you look at all these sugars, there's a nice brown colour. And sucrose, my honey. I'm going to show you somewhere else in the solar system, somewhere very strange indeed. Now, if you look at this moon here, this is a moon of Jupiter. It's covered in ice, and it has a heat source, a battery, an energy source. Inside, it's hot, and that means that underneath this ice, there's water. Now, if you look at the picture, you can see these cracks in the ice. That means it's moving. Tectonic movement, but of ice. But the really interesting thing is the brown stain all over the surface. Now, there's nothing brown that just falls from out in space. So what is it? Well, we've looked at the colours over here, and it's not coming up through the ice. If you look at Antarctica, it's all white. So maybe, just maybe, that has something to do with life. That's how we do science. Well, I hope you enjoyed lesson number 3. Lesson number 4, we'll start over here tomorrow. Bye-bye. Now, I've put some video of this for you to look at. And what I want you to remember is it's just a single cell. No brain, no controlling mechanism. It doesn't need anything. Just living by itself. A quantum relationship between energy and quantum objects. So have a look at the video. It's really amazing. Bye.